Happy Thursday. Good morning. PSW staff, clients, friends joining us. Almost through the week. Just tomorrow, right? And then we see your film scoring results. So can't wait for that. Hope you're enjoying Maverick Week. This is good. I mean, we looked at Van Dyke Park's Monday. Really iconoclastic thinker. Just different thinker. Also wrote words. I mean, we don't find that many composers that write their own words. You know, even Gilbert and Sullivan needed, one wrote music, one wrote lyrics. Cole Porter wrote both lyrics and music. George M. Cohen did. The Beatles wrote their own lyrics, of course, but Van Dyke was a brilliant lyricist, is a brilliant lyricist, as well as a orchestrator, composer, arranger, all of those things, conductor. We're going to take a look at Popeye at some point, because he was the arranger on that. Revisit that musical, that kind of quirky, fun musical. And then yesterday, Frank Zappa. It was just crazy. I mean, it's. Here's the thing: you maybe you hate it, maybe you love it, but you're probably not in between. And that's what these kind of artists really like. They don't like indifference, because if you're indifferent, you're just like, I don't really care one way or the other. I was reading some book about a comedian that said, I want to just either kill or just bomb, but nothing in between, because leaving the audience indifferent is like the worst to me. So I either want to make an impression. A lot of times these mavericks, they do want to do that, either consciously, but sometimes they who knows what goes on in their brain. They write very quirky music. I mean, with Alexander Desplat's score for this week's film scoring assignment, very quirky, very interesting, funny, humorous. I doubt he wrote those adjectives on paper, saying how do I come up with those things. It was probably just innate. A lot of this innate talent, that these are the sounds that I hear in my head, and film composers do that for films. Nino Rota did that. So you can't explain that. That's why we're not here to analyze it, because part of the fun and the mystery is recognizing there isn't a right answer, and there could be many interpretations. So Frank Zappa, not an indifferent listener. You would, it takes a fine ear too, a trained ear, maybe not trained ear, but you can't deny that he wasn't doing something completely original. But you don't have to. You can hate it, but you have to admit that. So let's admit that. Today we're going to revisit somebody who was a very famous blind composer that we looked at, Moondog. So his nickname is Moondog, but Louis Hardin. American musician, composer, poet, inventor, and from the age of 16 was blind. There was a little accident that happened on 4th of July, and he opened something up and it blew his eyesight out, so he was completely blind. His music and his influence, in particular on minimalism. So we've talked about minimalist composers. It's been a while, because I wanted to give you guys a little break from it, but we've talked about Philip Glass, we talked about Steve Reich, we talked about John Adams, we've talked about Michael Nyman. These guys were really influenced, and Steve Reich in particular and Philip Glass both cite him as their biggest influence, one of their biggest influences of minimalism music. This is really early, the stuff, the kind of music he was writing in the 50s about was really revolutionary, but it sounded really melodic and good. So let's get into Moondog.
Do your thing, leave country free to call a tune you sing.
So we gotta leave Hogwarts, because we're grown-ups now, so we can go over to Kansas City. My favorite part, and your favorite town, of course. So he's born in 1916. Let's look at our timeline here. 1916, that's a long time ago. This is after Scott Joplin, but he is, his music sounds like early jazz. It swings a lot, but he was a classical composer. and he started playing drums that he made from cardboard boxes at the age of 5. And he really loved listening to ragtime music with Scott Joplin, of course, and the military brass bands. Who else liked that stuff? Charles Ives was the other American composer that we looked at, who was very into ragtime and military marching bands and brass bands. So it's interesting when these people hear these types of music, and then they incorporate classical training. It's hard to get rid of that influence or subdue it when you're grown up with hearing these kind of things. So in Moondog's music, it was very influenced by this. And then he found an object in the field and didn't realize it was a dynamite cap, and it detonated and permanently blinded him. So, but he knew he had a little music training, and after learning the principles of music in several schools for blind men across Middle America, he taught himself music. He taught himself through using his ears, ear training and composition, and then he studied at the Iowa School for the Blind. So, although he was largely self-taught, he learned music theory from books in Braille. 1943, Hardin moves to New York. Of course, New York is the place where everything is happening. You know, jazz is starting to happen, and bebop, and also people like Leonard Bernstein. Bernstein, Toscanini, these guys are taking, as well as Charlie Parker and Benny Goodman, they're taking notice of this musician, Louis Hardin, Moondog. They're taking notice of him. He's got these very upbeat tempos and humorous compositions. There's a lot of humor in his music that he's writing. He was very well known to the jazz musicians and very friendly with a lot of them. In 1947, he gets his name Moondog in honor of a dog that used to howl at the moon. Kind of the 40s to the early 70s, he lives as a street musician. He's kind of homeless. He lived in and out of places, including he lived with Philip Glass for a while. And he'd hang out in Midtown Manhattan in a Nordic-looking outfit. He was 6'3", 6'4", eccentric guy, to say the least. He would make money selling his poems for 25 cents, or he would perform for money, and he would just kind of, stand out, and people would say, to the cab, take me, I want to go meet Moondog, and the cabbie would know exactly where to go. But in New York, he gets a record deal, and he's written, he writes hundreds of compositions, and they were transferred from Braille to sheet music. So he had it transcribed. Somebody transcribed it from Braille to sheet music. And then after New York, he spends the rest of his life in Germany, because close to his idols, Bach and Beethoven. Dies in 1999 from heart failure in Germany. Lives a long life, and what are we listening to? This is hard music to classify, isn't it? It's like with each piece I'm playing, it's almost like, you hear some pop influences, you definitely hear classical, you hear jazz. We've talked a little bit about third string music with Charlie Mingus. It's contemporary jazz and classical. It's got ambient sounds. You hear, at times you hear parts of the city of New York City, of the environment that he's using, of the city and traffic. This is the basis of his music. He's a street musician and wrote 81 symphonies, works for orchestra, chamber, and brass ensembles. He uses the saxophone, really brilliantly. Works for piano and organ in about 50 songs. It's very melodic. He wasn't very into atonal music, and that's something that a lot of composers, Schoenberg and even Stravinsky later on, that were into atonal, meaning without a tonal center. He was very melodic. He wasn't in that school, and I think that's what attracted Philip Glass and Steve Reich and those composers, because those guys weren't into you know, they respected the hell out of John Cage, but they weren't into that kind of music. And so they wanted to incorporate, how do we get melody and rhythm in our music, and how do we make these things more important than having confusing music on the page, you know, looking like, you know, where it looks more impressive to have a messy looking score than it is to actually want to hear something. So he was kind of anti-establishment in that realm, but knew everyone. Frank Zappa, Janis Joplin, everybody was interested in this guy. So I just thought it was somebody that we should talk about. Great American composer, somebody who's should be more recognized, is becoming more recognized, I think. There's supposed to be a documentary that's coming out about him that I'm very excited to see. But it does sound like great quintessential American music, and American classical jazz music that is just really just terrific. And I'm very happy with doing these classes and discovering with you these new composers, musicians, thinkers, creative type people that, you know, have changed the world, have changed our world. So that's Louis Hardin, Moondog. So now we know about him. So like I said, American composer. We've had all Americans this week. We've had Wes Anderson, American film director. Van Dyke Parks, American composer. Frank Zappa, American composer. Moondog, I mean, can you believe that life? I mean, from 1916, lived a very long time, and then at the age of 16 was blind. I mean, from something going on July 4th, was blind. So he did understand what the world looked like at one point, but then he taught himself music in the Iowa School of the Blind. This guy's another great reminder that there's no excuses for, saying, well, I can't do these things. But, I mean, if he's self-taught but learned music theory in books in Braille and then gave that to somebody and they would transcribe it, enormous amount of time invested without computers, of course. So he just had so many musical ideas in his head, and that Nordic outfit in New York was great. It's just, but we've heard a lot of pop, we heard a lot of jazz and classical. Again, with these Mavericks, they're listening to different things, and they're just writing music that sounds good to them and to their ears. So hope you enjoyed Moondog. Hope you enjoyed the wrapping up of the Maverick Week. Looked at some great thinkers. And love you guys, miss you guys, and tomorrow's Film Scoring results for Grand Budapest, so can't wait for that. Okay, have a great rest of the day. See you tomorrow.